Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, first off, congrats.
Thanks.
Oh, here we
Thanks.
are. It just said live.
Yes.
Congrats. How are you
Right.
feeling?
Yeah, feels great. Yeah, it's just an honor to be here book launch day, and people have been so kind with the reviews and
Hmm.
early reactions, and people are getting it in the mail right now, and it's just so much fun to see the joy of people. And I think the thing that's standing out to me the most right now is people saying how they're experiencing so much hope,
Yeah.
through the book, and how they feel it's quite timely for, disappointing, dejecting, depressing season of life right now, just with world events and things like that. So, yeah, just really grateful that you know yeah, that I get to journey with people in this season. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, we're here. Welcome everyone. And I know a lot of us will watch this online later on as well. But if we haven't met, my name's Joash. And a lot of you probably, if you're familiar with me, you may or may not know Johnna. So uh, I'll introduce Johnna a little bit, and I'd then love for Johnna to also introduce herself. But Johnna is a longtime friend at this point. We've been, I feel like, in the trenches of justice work together. You develop a special bond on social media when the same kind of trolls and haters come after you for standing up for justice, right? And I feel like our
Yes.
friendship has just kind of been one of those things. But Jonna does really incredible work that I actually spotlight in the book. I mentioned Jonna and the podcast that you may know her from, Bodies Behind the Bus, that does such incredible, uh, you know, spiritual abuse survivor advocacy work within the church. And anyway, you can do a better job introducing yourself, Shauna, but I'm just so grateful you're here to do this with me. And I'd kick it over to you. Tell us a little about yourself.
Awesome. Well, thanks for also celebrating book launch with me over here on Substack. I feel so honored. And truly just honored to be on this journey with you in general. For anybody who doesn't know, we are launching a new series over on Bodies Behind the Bus with Joash called Just Calling. It's dropping in our normal feed. And we're going to be diving into some of the topics that he covers in The Justice of Jesus, talking a little bit about how our work intersects. We'll probably talk about that a little bit today as well. But if you haven't, go subscribe there and listen to today's episode. And the reason I bring that up is because I was listening back and we talk about our friendship a little bit in the middle of the episode. And I was like, why am I getting so emotional? I was like, I'm going to cry. I have felt that all day. I texted Joash this morning. I was like, I feel like you had a baby. Like, I'm like
Hey, I'm not
so
allowed to
happy
say
for you.
that. You're allowed to say that. So thank you.
I think you can say it's a book baby, but yes, I'm so honored to be doing this with you. And Bodies Behind the Bus is a podcast that really highlights the survivor stories of people who've experienced abuse or whistleblown corruption in Western evangelical spaces. So we started with kind of like a honed in spotlight on the Acts 29 network. That's where me and my co host Jay Coyle came out of Acts 29 and pretty quickly started getting story requests for people just across the spectrum of Western evangelical spaces, whether it's a parachurch organization or a different denomination. So we have a catalog of about, I think today's episode was 114 actually. So we have a lot of stories over there. And through that, our goal has really been to say, it's not about this one bad actor. The fruit is this. What are the systemic issues that are happening, whether you're in an Acts 29 church, SBC church, or more progressive church? What are what are the roots of, that are bearing this just horrific fruit that is causing profound harm in people's lives? And we're really passionate that telling stories and listening to each other's stories is the first step towards making things right. And so that's the work that we do over at Bodies Behind the Bus. And we are under an umbrella organization that Jay and I co-founded called Sacred Wilderness. It's a nonprofit. And through Sacred Wilderness, we've been able to fund A lot, actually, of survivor care through licensed therapists, just covering those bills for people. Because when they come out of these spaces, oftentimes the people that are sharing their stories are people who were on church staffs. So they lost their jobs. They don't have any access to that triage care while you're coming out and needing the help. Um, but also, we will sometimes cover bills for people, like car bills. We've donated, and we're about to be dropping a fundraiser that you're going to be hearing about in a couple weeks when we cover the budget part of Joash's book, where we're going to be coming alongside some immigrant families here in the
Mm.
US that need some help. So that's the work that I do. And I think if you read or you start to read The Justice of Jesus, you're going to see why we're working together on Just Calling. How
Yeah.
was that intro? Did I do okay? Did I hit all the
That was
marks?
great. That was great. No, thanks, Johnna. That's very helpful context. And one thing I wanted to ask you was, I mean, you're on the front lines of this right now, right? In many ways, I wrote the book for people like you, people who are deeply in love with Jesus and justice, and find themselves discouraged, um, and seasons without hope, and really disappointed in the Western church, right? I mean, you're seeing the horror stories, you're hearing survivors firsthand share their accounts with you. On top of everything going on in the world, you're also being exposed to stories that the world doesn't know about, and then you get to share a little bit of what you know with the world, right?
Mhm.
So what was it like for someone in your shoes to then read this book? And yeah, well, how did you receive it? And what would you say to others who feel that sense of hopelessness right now?
I think are, if you're watching the news cycle, if you're on social media, or even if you just have a love for the church, especially if you're I mean, I'll speak as someone in the US. I don't know what it's like outside of the US, but right now it is so discouraging. And I think probably the biggest discouragement that I am grappling with every morning that I wake up is, I have this like expectation, I guess lack of expectation for the world to be, you know, acting a certain way, but I do have an expectation for the church to be showing up a certain way in the midst of injustice. And so continually watching how the church here in the US is oftentimes, the biggest proponents of the injustice that is happening here is soul crushing, to be honest
Mhm.
with you, like devastating. And um something I love about your book and why I'm so passionate about the project that we're working on together and have been working on together is that if we can zoom out and take a breath and read things like your book and look at what Jesus says about justice and look through the historical church outside of the US and how they have navigated injustice and really lean on people that, for me, that are not white evangelicals from the West, has been deeply refreshing and has honestly been the only place that I have found hope. I'll say like your book and then Jamar Tisby's newest book have been um, works that I have come back to regularly over the past few months. And I mean, I have my days. Yesterday was a day where I was just like, I am so blue. Like, I can't even, it's hard for me to take the next step. So, what I love about your book and why I find it so hopeful is that it gives me practical step by step in the midst of the chaos and disillusionment and sadness that I'm experiencing, where I'm not having to like dream up what is the next step. I can look to your book, I can look to the past and see what have Christians been doing historically? Like how do we all fit into this grand picture that
Mhm.
God is painting? And um that's where I find hope in your book. And it's honestly just so gentle. I think so many of us are so disillusioned right now, and rightfully angry. And I mean, I lean on anger a lot to motivate myself to the next steps. I'm not anti-anger. I'm very pro anger, But, like, at the same time, that can't be the only emotion I'm
Mm,
relying on.
mm,
And your book, um, it's so gentle and kind.
mm,
It's really shepherding, and I'll speak for myself, but I think I can say this for your other readers, that if you're finding yourself feeling just, like, angry and hopeless, you're going to meet a shepherd's heart when you're
mm.
reading this book, and you're going to feel cared for, and you're going to feel protected and safe as you read through these pages, and I think that's rare and really needed right now.
Wow, wow. That's so encouraging. Thanks for sharing that, Johnna. And yeah, really encouraged that this is how you received it because that is absolutely the intent and heart that I had going into
Mhm.
this. As you know, I write so much of this book from my own transformation of being asleep and apathetic towards the suffering of my marginalized neighbors, caring about some of my marginalized neighbors, but not all of them. And then, just this journey of being awakened to the justice of Jesus myself. And one of the first emotions that you experience when you're awakened to these acts of injustice around you is anger, like you said. And
Mhm.
I think that's a righteous emotion. It's a dangerous emotion for sure, as my therapist reminds me. But it's also a righteous emotion at the same time. If you're angry about the right things, if you're angry about the things that anger the heart of God, and Scripture is unanimous in saying that that's injustice and oppression towards our marginalized neighbors. So I think it's totally valid to feel that anger, and at the same time, I've had to you know ask myself, okay, what's the main thing here? What am I trying to get towards? And for me, that's the liberation of my marginalized neighbors, right? And inviting the church into that journey of liberation. So how do we channel that anger, that righteous anger, into something just, something redemptive, something healing for this world, right? I'm not telling us to suppress that anger. I'm saying be angry about these things, but then let's channel it in a direction that brings
Mhm.
justice and shalom and true reconciliation around the world. And this is why the first three chapters of the book are diagnosis. And a lot of people have
Mhm.
told me that um, they've read the first three chapters and they've found themselves really angry. Like I had someone tell me I had to actually stop for a little bit because there was so much that I didn't know that was broken, and I just felt this anger rise within me. And that's totally understandable. But then the next six chapters of the book, so really chapters 4 to 9, are that prognostic hope. Like, where do we go from here? Here are some churches that are getting it right. Here's what we can learn from them, kind of a thing, like you said. So I'm really encouraged that you felt validated in that righteous anger for justice, and at the same time felt like, from what I hear you saying, it almost feels like you felt like you're able to channel that toward hope, which is something that we
Yeah.
don't see as something that could come from anger. But I think
Mhm.
to Christians, hope comes from anger, and
Mhm.
true hope must come from a place of first feeling that pain and that brokenness on behalf of our
Mhm.
marginalized neighbors, and then being transformed in a positive way by it, in Jesus's way and not empire's way. And you and I have talked about this, Shauna. Like, I'd love for you to talk about this more. Like, we know people, we see people, like, you and I have been doing this publicly long enough where we often come across other well-intentioned people who've also been conditioned by the same empires that you and I have, and they pursue justice in ways that uh, sometimes don't look like Jesus, even if they're ultimately advocating for the right things.
Mhm.
The way they do it is more like empire than Jesus, right? Like, I know we've had these
Right.
discussions, but tell us more about how you feel in your body when you see things like that and what that's looked like.
Yeah, I think there's a reason Empire uses the tools it does,
Mm,
because they work to get results, if results are like if your end goal is getting a specific result, then and getting there as fast as possible, then like empire's where it's at. You bend people into the mold that you need them to be in to get the results that you need. But
Mm,
that's not how Jesus works. And that's not and Jesus is the compelling part of Christianity, right?
right.
Like
In theory.
the in theory, the result, like I'm not here to like be co-signed for some random initiative. Like I'm here to be transformed to looking more like Jesus, which is
Wow.
slow and messy and is not going to be lucrative ever. And honestly, it's going to burn bridges, unfortunately, because people don't want to sit and be slow, especially here in the West. Like,
Mm,
and in this current moment, I think that's always been a part of our DNA. I think you talk about that on the book, but in this current moment, I'm watching so many well-intentioned people and peers just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Like, what do we do? Everything's melting down and like democracy's dying. And fair, fair. I feel that in my soul too. But at the same time, I have watched people choose decisions that maybe are not the most Christ-like decisions in the moment out of fear or shame or you know, this like mission over people. Maybe we're going to protect this giant group of people, but it's going to cost us this small, marginalized group of people over here. Maybe we can like barter with whose humanity we're going to protect in this moment. And I'm not trying
mm,
to make these really nuanced conversations easy. They're not easy, but something beautiful that you have taught me through our friendship actually is that Jesus can swap sides
mm,
depending on the moment by moment, with and stands with who is being oppressed. And that has brought me so much freedom over the past, especially over the past however long, really, since the campaign, but truly the
yeah.
past 2 years since you told me that. It's brought me so much freedom because I don't feel like I have to make a stance when it comes to like whose oppression I'm going to I'm caring about today. It's like, no, because I'm following Jesus, I get to care about all of it. I get to care about all of it. And I get to say, no, we're going to slow down and we're going to honor what this person is sharing with us right now and what they are experiencing right now. And we're not going to say, I don't have time for you. Like, Jesus has time for them. And
Mm,
Jesus never coerces, he's not manipulative. Like, that is what I want to pursue. And that's why I love the way that you engage this conversation, especially
mm,
all across the board, but especially in your book, where you just bring us in and you give us an opportunity to slow down and to bear witness. And then from that, we're able to then move forward. We're not just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. What works, what doesn't work? Like, take a beat and just listen. And that's
mm,
not something that I'm good at,
mm.
but I'm working on it. And I think that's not something that most of us here in the West are good at. But you disciple us into that through your book. And I love that. I love,
Mm.
love, love that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that that resonated with you, and I see a few comments here too. Ben says, "I just got through that section. It's fantastic advice." Michael Pinnell, hey Michael, good to see you. Michael says, yeah, I think he was resonating with something you said, Johnna, which is that's not how Jesus works, right? And Michael
Mhm.
says so key. That's not how
Mhm.
Jesus works, and that should be our barometer for assessing these things, right? Like, and there is a real difference between the justice of Jesus and the justice of empire, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that needs to be something else I write about, I guess.
Book number two? Did we just find it? I think you already have book number two in the works.
Yeah,
Book number
no.
three?
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what's actually helpful to the world, what the publishers
Mm.
think is helpful. But yeah, I think with the justice of empire, it's and I say this too. I say that um, I often get asked, what is justice? What is biblical justice? Things like that. And I say all justice is God's justice, right? So throughout the book, I don't use the term biblical justice because
Mhm.
I think if anything, um, we tend to come up with these categories of what's biblical and what's not. And people in power
Mhm.
tend to come up with these categories to keep out people from experiencing Jesus, from experiencing inclusion in the family of
Mhm.
God. And so I say, I don't use the category of biblical justice because all justice is God's justice.
Mhm.
Now, this is not to say that there aren't ideas of secular justice or justice empire's
Mhm.
way. But probably not the way we've been conditioned to, again, by
Right.
empire. So, um, I think instead of saying who justice is not for, I define justice empire's way as um, justice that is violent, retributive,
Mhm.
um, does not seeing does not seek the whole well-being of the oppressor, for example. So, let's just I often have people ask me, in doing the work of justice, um, do you not get so angry that you just want the death penalty for these bad guys trafficking little children or
Mhm.
harming women, things like that? And I say, well, no, because Scripture also says justice is mine, vengeance is
Mhm.
mine, says the Lord. And if we get involved in executing what we think is divine justice, then we're keeping that person from the justice of God, which is ultimately restorative, because
Mhm.
they're made in the image of God too. And as I say throughout the book, injustice isn't just bad for people who are oppressed, it's also bad for the oppressor
Mhm.
and those on their side. And this is why the Western church is where it is today. We haven't reckoned with how we participated in the colonial project. And we, find ourselves today being shaped by that theology that we exported out to the world through the colonial project. So anyway, I got down a rabbit hole there with the ADHD brain
No,
stuff.
I think it's so valuable because I mean, if you've listened to a majority of our stories, actually, we just had a series out of a church in Austin, Texas, that was multiple people at multiple levels of the hierarchy in this church, and a big theme through. I think I have to be in the high, like around 60 to 80 calls out of this one congregation over the past year. So much pain and harm. And a lot of the processing that people are doing in these communities, or this community in particular, but I will say I've heard it in a lot of communities, is that as they climb this hierarchy in the structure, whatever that looks like in the church that they're at, whether it's on staff or whether it's becoming an elder or a community group leader in these Western evangelical spaces, they are first experiencing harm and abuse and then being brought into it and then perpetrating it because that's how
Mm,
this system works. So, what you're talking about is so important. I think it keeps people from actually looking like when you said that someone was witnessing things they hadn't seen before when they're reading those first 3 chapters of your book. First off, good
mm,
job, whoever you are. I'm so proud of you for even picking the book up and reading it. But I also think that's really important data for us in our work at Bodies Behind the Bus, and also you with your book and the justice work that you're doing, is that there's so much shame and guilt
mm,
attached to our own parts of how we've allowed ourselves to become weapons of empire in these structures. And it hurts to reckon with that.
mm,
Um, but something that I love about Jesus is that, and I believe this so deeply, is that the truth sets us free.
mm,
And that living our life without reckoning with the lies that we've believed and lived, or the harms that we have perpetrated, or like sitting back and assessing the harms that we've experienced at the hands of people that we cared about or we respected. I think without that, we are actually shackled and we're not allowed to walk in the liberation that you talk about in your book, and it causes this awful cycle of us just leaning into empire. And something I've learned from you, but also one of my best friends is Palestinian. Her family are Palestinian immigrants. And we were talking about Western evangelicalism and Eastern evangelicalism. I've said this to you 4 million times, so just bear with me, Joash.
Go for it, please.
But and it like, oh my gosh, it blew my mind. I was like, this is it. She said, here in the West, the way that Christianity is lived out in these evangelical spaces is that the ends justify the means. We're all aiming for these ends. And she said, where I come from, my faith is it all like the journey is what matters.
Hmm.
And who we are as we're getting there is what matters. And I think for you and me and the work we're doing, I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. I needed this. Like
Right.
when I'm starting to feel the dissonance or the confusion with what I'm seeing said in mainstream evangelicalism here in the US versus what I feel like truly convicted by the Spirit is who God is and what kingdom works looks like. I think that has really helped bring my focus in when I think like who I am on the journey, does that look like Jesus? Because if we do things, Emily Snook, one of our board members, awesome human, and she's consistently helping me see things clearly, says like doing the right things the right way always. If we do the right things the wrong way, then it's the wrong thing. It's never the right thing. And I said all this in a very also neurodivergent way to bring us back to this idea of justice
Hmm.
and how we do justice is so important because if we're doing it the way that you're describing, the way that the empire calls us to do it, then it's actually not justice.
Yeah.
It's wrong. There's something, it's tainted, it's toxic, it's the stuff that God says he spits out of his mouth. And so that's what I love your work. I love what you're doing. I love the ways that you invite us into very practical, which if you guys start reading, you're going to see there's very practical things that you can start doing, just little changes in your life to start stepping into justice work. As Joash and I were planning out Just Calling and then pulled Jay in because we were both like, we go on too many rabbit trails, if you couldn't tell. um, but as we were doing that, a big theme is one, we wanted people to feel safe to have hard conversations, which is something that you have offered me time and time again, is you've allowed space for me to stumble through white supremacy, figuring out like, what is white supremacy? What is colonization? What are these things? And you've allowed space for me as a friend to ask those really uncomfortable questions about myself, even to you. And we wanted to model that for listeners. We wanted to show people that having the conversations is not wrong and it's okay. And it's good to do this self-examination.
Yeah.
And I also just thank you for who you are and that you've helped carry that and, put up with that and gone on that journey with me. It has been profoundly impactful in my life and helped to shape who I am. And I'm a better person because of it and who you are. And I see God reflected back at me through our friendship. It means so much to me.
That's so kind,
So
John. I really
yeah,
appreciate that. That's very kind. And
yeah,
vice versa. Like you taught me so much and I've learned so much from your experiences just sitting with survivors, hearing from them and yeah, just processing, that trauma with you of what you're exposed to as well when you
yeah.
directly collect and tell these stories with them on their behalf. And before I go into this next part, I'll say real quick. I see we've got a few dozen people here, and I know we'll have more people watching the recording later. But if you have questions popping up, emerging for Johnna, myself about the book, the work of Bodies Behind the Bus, or Sacred Wilderness, or anything else, just drop it in the chat, and we'd love to get to your questions in the last few minutes of this. But just to really emphasize how mutual this this appreciation is for each other's work. I'm going to embarrass Johnna. I didn't tell her I'd do this, but I'm going to read the section that I wrote about her in the book out loud in front of her. I've never actually done this before, so this will be
I'm
fun.
going to gaze into your eyes while you read this book.
But it's in a section on, so this is in chapter, man, I don't even remember where things are in the book anymore, but this is part 2 of the book, Decolonizing the Western Church, chapter 4, Decolonizing Our Theology, under the section, Recentering the Table. And I say, my friend Johnna Harris made the following comment during the course of a recent conversation. I feel like progressive evangelicals form their own church communities only to rinse and repeat strategies and tactics they learned from their previous conservative fundamentalist churches. Johnna hosts the podcast Bodies Behind the Bus, which features spiritual abuse survivors. The podcast is named after the now infamous words of Pastor Mark Driscoll. There is a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus, and by God's grace, it'll be a mountain by the time we're done. You either get on the bus or you get run over by the bus. Those are the 2 options. But the bus ain't going to stop. And then I go on to say, when we prioritize the salvation of souls over the liberation of human bodies, we, church and ministry leaders, say bizarre things that sound nothing like the way of Jesus. To Michael's point here. During my recent conversations with Johnna, she and I found we're of the same mind. Until and unless we stop to take a hard look under the hood of the bus, the institutional church, we will continue seeing more people being thrown under it. And the best way to avoid piling up bodies behind the bus is to stop and fix the darn bus. Unfortunately, many progressive evangelicals rush to plant attractional churches that look, feel, and sound like the rudderless evangelical churches they just left. The theology may be different, but the structures of power and uniformity are more or less the same. Also reading the section because I sometimes get accused of not saying bad things about progressive evangelicals when throughout the book I'm critiquing everyone. Yeah, I don't really know how many friends I'll have after after people
Equal
have actually read the
opportunity
book.
critique.
Right, because people both on the left and the right, both on the conservative evangelical and progressive evangelical side are shaped by empire ultimately at the end of the day, right? And we don't even realize it. So it's important for us to ask questions like this, to take a look under systemic institutional structures and get a better sense of what led us to where we are today. But yeah, if folks have questions, we'll get to them shortly. But before that, I just wanted to say, yeah, like this, I'm excited to be in partnership with you, Johnna, around the book. You're in the book, and the book is out today. So get your copy wherever you buy your books, and then yeah, and I also care deeply about um, giving people the space to process the book. I know it's a lot of heavy information, and I want to make sure we process this in community with each other in small groups and churches, that kind of thing. So there are discussion questions at the end of every chapter in the book to make it easy for you to host a small group or a book study and just go through the book chapter by chapter over 9 weeks if you wanted, one for each chapter. And then we also did this podcast that Johnna mentioned earlier, in case you missed it. So I hopped on Bodies Behind the Bus podcast that I mentioned in the book, and we did this series called Just Calling, where the whole thesis of it is that justice isn't just for a few heroes, right? It's for everyone in the church, and really all of humanity, seeing the church living out the ways of Jesus and being invited into that community project of liberation. So we'll be unpacking multiple chapters in the podcast. And I'm excited for those conversations. You'll get to hear some behind the scenes and also connecting things with current events and what's broken in our world right now, and also where we can see signs of hope, where we can find Jesus in the midst of all the brokenness. And then, in addition to that, I'm also teaching a course with a cohort with the Deep and Wide Academy, run by Danielle Strickland, a dear friend and endorser of this book, and would love for people to hop on that course cohort. It's basically a 5-week live virtual experience where I'll be teaching this and kind of unpacking and doing discussion with people in that cohort. And it's just a living room type small group virtual discussion to have these conversations. And so many of us have a heart for justice, but we don't have a lot of spaces to process these things. And I'm all about creating these spaces and encouraging people to create these spaces. And I know Johnna is as well. So with that, let's take a few questions. Looks like we've got a few here. Thank you, Lamar, for the first one. Lamar says, what are some positive models of church communities that you encourage us to look at? Yeah, I'll answer this first, and then John, if you've got thoughts of your own, would love for you to also weigh in. But throughout the book, one of the things that I say is that one of the things that we try to do with our modern lenses today is we try to reinvent the wheel so much. This is why so many churches operate like circuses, quite honestly. And I I don't want to be judgmental in saying that, but just the weirdest things, right? Like one of my pastors once started juggling balls in the middle of a sermon, and if that's not circus-like for a sermon illustration,
Then what
I don't
is?
know what is. So I'm literally thinking of that when I say that. But we try to reinvent the wheel and try to figure it out, and then we learn from the capitalistic world around us, and we end up with church structures that look nothing like Jesus and nothing like the early church. And so something that I often hear people saying is, "Oh, I wish we had safe third spaces in the community where people across political divides can get together and sit together and eat together and not center on those other things, but center on their shared humanity and what binds them together." And I think, wait a second, this is what the Eucharistic table was always meant to be, right? Like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. But Jesus's table has space for everyone. And unfortunately, you've had church traditions keep people out for all kinds of reasons. But we forget that if Judas had a seat at Jesus's table, then all of us have a seat at Jesus's table. Like, who are we to keep people out if Jesus allowed his own betrayer to be at that table, right? And so so I think there's so much in the Christian tradition that is lost or needs to be retrieved or we overlook or take for granted. And I think in terms of church practices, I would point us to some of those ancient practices that have stood the test of time, that may not have always been executed perfectly because we're all human beings at the end of the day, but there's deep wisdom to these church traditions. So that's a direction I'd go in a little bit. But I'd love to hear, Johnna, your thoughts as someone who deals with
Yeah.
faith stories all the time.
So he actually clarified that he meant, like, do you see congregations practicing these things in a healthy way?
Mm.
Probably shouldn't have said models,
Oh,
which I loved your answer anyways and thought it was helpful for us all to hear.
that's helpful.
And
Yeah.
I am not the person to ask this question for, probably. Joash probably encounters a lot more health than I do. When I'm talking to people or encountering people, it's because they've experienced the bad stuff.
Mhm.
But I will say, I even I have I have gone through seasons of how I feel about being in a church. And for a while, I was not in a church at all, personally. And I would pull up to a parking lot and sometimes puke, like, can't walk in the doors. And that's not
Mm.
unheard of. If some of you are here listening today and you've experienced that, it's very, very common, like more common than you would think, people having panic attacks in their cars in front of churches. Um, but through my journey, I always come back to this, like, deep love and appreciation for the local church and have
Mm.
been unable to find that community anywhere else. And I tried. I was like, let's join sports for our kids, or like what if we do XYZ? And just none of it filled the same space in my soul that the local church did. But it has broken down a lot. So I'll use a word, deconstruction. I deconstructed, and like to move a step further, decolonized. I think I'm in the process, a lifelong process of that. My view of what church is, and I have found church and Jesus and community. We are at a great church right now, actually. So yay, there is one in Phoenix, Arizona that I love. My dear friend Caleb Campbell is the pastor there, talking about Christian nationalism and disarming Leviathan, if you're looking for a book about that. But also just like realizing that church can look like two or more gathered
Yeah.
around a dinner table. And these third spaces that you're talking about, that's where I feel like I've encountered
Mm.
Jesus the most the past 5 years, is sitting around the dinner table and listening to how people are doing, how people are processing, where they see God. Even non-believers, as much as that is, like sitting around the table with mixed company and just
Yeah.
watching God reflected back at me through them. So in the West, I don't see a ton of examples of this. I would say like the Black church has a lot more examples of this
Yeah.
than the spaces I'm coming out of, which are like neo-reformed, skinny jeans with tattoos, white dudes that think they know everything in the world. But Joash, I think you actually highlight a
Yeah,
couple of these
I do.
communities in the book. So
Yeah,
you're a little
yeah,
more hopeful here in the conversation.
yeah. Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah, no, thanks for that, Johnna, and thanks for the clarification too, Lamar. So I would say I highlight a number of examples, probably half a dozen to a dozen of positive examples of the church across the West, across the global South. So there are a lot of denominations, like the Catholic denomination, the Anglican denomination, that had participated in the colonial project and benefited from it, and is now doing historical reckoning with, oh my goodness, like we made billions of pounds of this, of investing in slave ships, as the Church of England recently found out. I mentioned this in the book. And so now they're like, what do we do now? Well, if we look at the model of Zacchaeus, after he is confronted with Jesus and after his encounter with Jesus, he's transformed and he gives back multiple fold, right? So that's a form of reparation. So those churches are now giving resources back. So I even talk about a church here in Canada, Sterling Mennonite Church, where they found out that the land they have right now was land that was acquired from indigenous communities through ill-gotten means, through trickery and things like that. And it's appropriate for me talking about this today in Canada, because today in Canada is Truth and Reconciliation Day. It's a public holiday in honor of our indigenous neighbors and the ways in which they were wronged. And so anyway, Sterling has said, hey, it's not much, but we're going to give 1% of our budget to begin with to local indigenous neighbors doing educational work in their community. And that's a way of reckoning with the privilege that we've inherited through, like, we weren't responsible. Many generations before in church leadership for our church did this, but we're still benefited from it. So we're going to take ownership of it and do the right thing. And I see the Church of England doing that too. What's interesting with the Church of England example is you have people then saying, and I highlight this too, you have people saying, well, you know, um, this is a distraction from Frontline's gospel work. Our churches are not doing that well. Our numbers aren't strong. This is a distraction from Frontline gospel work. And I'm like, hold up. Like, are we really calling the work of giving reparations back to communities that we extracted wealth from and have benefited of? Are we calling that not Frontline gospel work? And why? Like, again, where does this colonized theology come from, right? So I see a number of examples like that. I also share an example of a church in Sarnia, Canada, on the U.S.-Canadian border that has a very ugly bright orange shag rug, and it
Mm.
is bright and orange. You see it all the time when you walk in their live stream. But that community is one of the most, it's a small church, like maybe 100 people, but
Mhm.
very, very generous toward trafficking both locally because they're a border town and globally. And they know the cost of replacing that shag rug. But instead of being like an attractional church that focuses on numbers and, being marketing savvy,
Mhm.
they would rather tolerate the shag rug and basically have room in their budget to do justice work. And their pastor is on three-fourths time to also make room in the budget for the work of justice in the community. So those are just a few examples, but the book is full of them. I name names of the good examples. I keep the bad examples anonymous. So do read those examples. And then Lamar also had a question for you, Johnna, and we'll take this and close here just to respect everyone's time. But I think his question for you was, what does pushing and looking under the hood look like for institutions that
Mm.
poor folks can't afford to disengage with? Example, abuse in public schools. And how does one engage with injustice in spaces where you can't afford to opt out of? Really good questions. I'm so glad he asked them to you,
Mhm.
Johnna. Go for it.
Just some softball questions here. No, like something that I am really blessed to have been invited to this group that are believers here locally in Phoenix, which I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. Wild place to be living right now. Kind of always, but right now in particular has been just I love the desert. I love this city, and it is a wild place to live. But it's kind of a really big mix, like diversity across the spectrum, um, age, gender, race, all the things. And we're all there processing, and we're all there processing knowing we're like minded about justice and the church, which has been wildly, Phoenix is wild, yes, has been wildly helpful for me, though. And um, something that we've continuously talked about is like the cost of doing justice, and how different people at different levels of privilege. I'm going to use the P word. Sorry if that makes people uncomfortable, but it's a reality. Different
Yeah.
levels of privilege, life experience, like they're going to have different costs, especially in this current historical moment. So like for me as a white middle class straight woman, it costs me significantly less or costs me differently to go show up at a courthouse and walk an immigrant to their immigration hearing, which I'm looking into some training right now. I heard a stat that it's something like 80% less likely so someone can go fact check me. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I think this was a stat. It's something like 80% less likely to be detained entering or exiting their immigration hearing if a white person is walking with them. Like, obviously, it makes much more sense for me to be the person going and walking with them than for, my like immigrant neighbor to go walk with them who's potentially going to be physically harmed or detained themselves by being there. So I think part of this and part of like the reason that Joash and I are partnering together is to invite people to get a little uncomfortable, specifically white people, to get a little uncomfortable and recognize that um, the privilege that has allowed for our comfort also invites us into justice work now in a different way, where we can be front lines and kind of run. Gosh, I'm gonna get destroyed for this. I'm gonna try to use a sports reference, but, like, run defense or, like, block people, um, from that, like, initial injustice that's happening. So,
Mm,
like, Ideally, I guess what I'm saying is if you have the privilege and you have the comfort and it's going to cost you less, I think in those spaces, those are the people that should be speaking up right now. So if you're in a
Well,
church in a city or a district that is underprivileged or under resourced, are you taking 20 minutes out of your day to meet with the front office and ask them if they have a plan for if ICE shows up at the school? Are you like donating? Are you getting involved in school boards? Like these little things that take time and are uncomfortable. Where are the ways that you can step into that? And I don't have perspective of being someone that, is underprivileged in a system that I don't have an option of being a part of. Like my life has brought me comforts in a way that I haven't had to experience that. But my hope would be that people that have more comforts and more protections are the ones that are doing justice in those spaces, especially if they are claiming the name of Jesus.
yeah,
Josh, do you have
that's
some
good.
input for that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, and just to be clear, it's not that Johnna is saying this, but just so no one walks away with this impression, um, we're not saying that it's only white people who have this privilege,
Mm-mm.
right? Like, as a man, I have privileges that Johnna here wouldn't. I would be
Mhm.
invited into a lot of church and ministry spaces that
Mhm.
someone like Johnna wouldn't, right? Just because of my male privilege.
Mhm.
Same's true for, like, I mean, I'm literally giving a talk tomorrow where I start the talk by talking about my own privilege and saying
Mhm.
I probably had more privilege than most of you in the room here in Canada because I grew up with a maid, a cook, and a driver, right? But I
Mhm.
also grew up with an awareness of people around me who didn't have those privileges, right? And so I say this throughout the book: you can't change the past, but you can be faithful in the present. You can't change what you've inherited, but you can be faithful with how you choose to show up with it in our world today. And I love the example you gave of throwing our bodies in between the oppressor and our marginalized neighbors, because
Mhm.
that's ultimately what Jesus does for us, right? And so we don't do that
Mhm.
because of political motivations. We do that because of our love for Jesus and a love for the image of Jesus in our
Mhm.
neighbors. And so yes, so all of us, I think, need to discern with the Spirit how we find ourselves being privileged in this season where there's great suffering and injustice in the world, and then discern what it looks like for us to show up. So I can't prescribe solutions for everyone's specific context, but
Right.
I've given us some ideas throughout the book that I hope can be helpful in sparking some reimagination work here. But, Johnna, this was such a delight, such a pleasure to, get to do this with you.
Mhm.
I'm enjoying doing a lot of fun things with you, like the series and the podcast and all of that. But just as a reminder to folks who might have jumped on, the book, The Justice of Jesus, is finally out. I've been talking about it for like over a year now, so it's kind of surreal to say that it's out. So go ahead, get your copies wherever you buy your books. You can even get extra copies if you'd like to start a small group or a book study.
Mhm.
And you know what? Just if you get extra copies, just like reach out to me, let me know, and I'll see if I can send a thank you gift in some way, whether it's the butter chicken recipe or just a discount code to the cohort I'm doing with
Mhm.
Deep and Wide Academy. And then something else I'd say is go check out Bodies Behind the Bus. Go check out Sacred Wilderness. Jump into the series that we're doing. The first episode just dropped today. It's called Just Calling, and it's the first of a few episodes where we unpack
Mhm.
themes in this book. And support the work of Sacred Wilderness in the season too. I know
Mhm.
that monthly donors are always a big need for organizations like yours doing good work, Johnna. So do that. And thank you for joining us. And being so engaged in the comments. And I look forward to seeing the reactions of people who see the recording of this as well. But yeah, blessings, everyone. And thank you, Johnna.
Thank you, Joash, and congratulations. Big day. So grateful to do this with you. So proud of you, friend. Yeah, go listen to podcasts because you're going to hear one, there's a back catalog of stories that I think are really important if you're trying to wrestle with this, but two, just even if you just start with just calling, if you enjoyed the conversation today, guess what? We have more for you over there. So thank
Yeah.
you, Joash. I hope you get to celebrate so big today.
Thanks, Johnna. Appreciate you. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Blessings.